Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns. And I have to tell you that when Joe Atkins, Representative Joe Atkins, started here a decade ago, he was the youthful, invigorating head of the House. He's now running for his 6th term. He didn't have gray hair in those days.
I also didn't have teenagers in those days either.
Didn't have teenagers in those days either, okay. And yesterday, he was just picked by Politics in Minnesota as the top debater in the Minnesota House. But you have won so many awards over the years, going back to college, and you were one of the top 10 Minnesota lawyers, and you are in top lawyers in America, and I don't even know, maybe you know better than I.
Actually, I don't necessarily know. I think when they are really desperate to give an award out and they don't have anybody else that's qualified, I end up getting it. But I was actually I was named the Firefighters Legislator of the Year. And in my family, where I've got my father-in-law was the fire chief, my brother-in-law was the fire chief, my nephew's a firefighter, brother-in-law is a firefighter, I figured now I can go to Christmas and be proud.
You were also the youngest mayor in the history of Inver Grove Heights.
Yeah, I was.
And one of the things that really has distinguished your career is the fact that you are a people's legislator. You are not one of these guys who, even though you're involved in policy, gets involved in these esoteric policy wonk things. You do practical things that really help people. And we'll talk about some of them. But in fact, there's a Republican by the name of Jeff Michael, or Michelle, and he said that Atkins is the mainstream of moderate Minnesota. He talks to business and job creators. And that's a real compliment. Mm-hmm. You financed a community center while you were mayor of Inver Grove Heights, and you did it without any public money. We hear so much about that today. You were one of the first people to complain about steroids in sports and how they were damaging sports. And Lance Armstrong was just telling me the other day that he wished he had listened to you. You were introducing legislation to to stop putting expiration dates on gift cards, so that people who got gift cards went to use them and they found out they had expired. You were involved in the Truth in Music Act. Tell us what that was.
Well, I was wondering if you were going to let me talk today, or if
I'm not going to let you talk.
And actually, you know what? As long as you keep saying nice things about me, I'm happy not to say a word.
And we have to mention that you're running for your 6th term, but we haven't. You know, well, I think people are entitled to know that they have a legislator who really, really takes their needs to heart and is out in front doing things for them.
You know, actually,
and
Alan,
you've done so many things.
That's the best part of the job. You know, we talk about, in fact, I found out, I guess it'd be 4 or 5 weeks ago, that I've passed more bipartisan laws the last 5 years than any other state representative. and that's wonderful. But to me, that's not the most important part of the job. The coolest part of the job is when you can, you know, somebody's got an issue or a problem. In fact, literally yesterday, it's ironic that I'm on your show today. There was a woman, she's got HER2-NU breast cancer, stage 2, very, very aggressive, one of the most aggressive forms of breast cancer that there is. She immediately, when her doctor made the diagnosis, they immediately did surgery, 19 lymph nodes removed. She's not even a constituent of mine. She lives just across town a little bit. Representative Hoppy, who's a Republican from Chaska, called me when he became aware of it. She was denied by her insurance company for the radiation and chemotherapy to follow. And her doctor told her, surgery went great, but if you don't have chemo and radiation, you're going to die. Representative Hoppy and I went to Commissioner Rothman, who's the Commerce Commissioner, got him to reverse the decision on the insurance company covering the chemo and radiation. They had initially denied it, which just shocked us. She was set to start chemo and radiation, and she actually now is underway with that. That's the best part of the job, is being able to take those concerns that people have, and we don't always save lives doing it, but it's
but that's one of the things that you have done and continue to do, which makes you very unique among legislators.
I don't know. I think other legislators would hopefully do the same thing. I just get, it seems like I get more chances to do it, or maybe people seek me out because of those sorts of things.
We have a state senator here in this district who's a member of ALEC and goes to ALEC conventions sponsored by the Koch brothers. I don't find that very endearing to the district, and they don't make themselves available to people. You know, you always have your door open, and people know where to find you.
Not only is my door open, I've been at people's doors. I just rolled over 12,000 doors yesterday. My kids, you know, I got on my phone now, I can keep track of how many miles I go. And I'm over 315 miles, 2 pairs of shoes, and 12,000 doors. So it's not just my door that's open, but all the nice people whose doors I've stopped at have been nice enough to open their doors too.
You sound like the Jim Carlson of our neighbor district.
Well, although I've been joking, I've been telling my wife this is the new version of the Atkins diet. You remember the old Atkins diet?
I sure do.
You ate all meat and no carbs and that kind of thing. I've lost about 15 pounds, and all you got to do is knock 12,000 doors and go through, you know, about 300 miles.
Because
and miss
you
a few
treat
meals.
every election like it's the first election.
Well,
you don't take it for granted.
You know, I don't. But I genuinely enjoy going door to door and visiting with people too. I mean, I also violate every rule of door knocking. You're supposed to spend like 20 seconds at a door, don't talk about any issues, and then move on as fast as you can. I'd never spend 20 seconds. This will shock you, but I'm a little chatty. And
Is that true?
I see friends, I see classmates.
You can't say hello in 20 seconds.
No, I know. But you also can't find out how people really feel about issues in 20 seconds. I go out there to sort of learn where people are at, what's important to them. The only way that you can take what they feel to the Capitol is to talk to them about how they feel.
And that's
if
why
you're only going to spend 20 seconds, you're not going to know
won
much.
Elections by 60 and 70 percent.
It's been really good. I've been always surprised at the percentages that I managed to get, but I'm very thankful for it.
So there was a problem with the Lakota Bridge. Who was the legislator who was on top of it? Who was the guy who got $20 million back because of flawed plans?
And I would have been happy not to be that guy.
But you were that guy.
I was that guy, but it was out of desperation finally. The Lakota Bridge got so far behind and so far over budget. And generally I think the legislature should try to stay out of things rather than, in fact, my goal is to, for every law I pass, I try to repeal one too. Even though the folks here were at Thomson Reuters, they probably love it when we pass more laws and make the statute books even larger.
We're practically not using books anymore.
I've heard
that. I hate to tell you.
In my little office, I don't think I've grabbed I tell everybody those law books are for the other lawyers who haven't memorized them yet. But yeah, everything's online.
That's for the fees. I am actually going to produce just covers of law books with nothing inside so that lawyers can put them on the shelves of their office and justify the high fees.
That would be, I don't know about justifying the high fees, but they'd be a lot easier to carry around. So.
And there's one person in the back with a computer that does all the work. So.
We literally just moved. We built a new office in South St. Paul.
I've been privileged to be there, and
it
it's
was
a
nice
beautiful,
beautiful
operation.
But lawyers years that we are kind of cheap, we're sort of frugal. I like to say frugal. My wife says cheap. But we decided we were going to try to save a little bit on the move, so we were going to move some of that stuff ourselves. Never, ever do that. That is, I now know why you hire these burly young guys and gals to move things for you. Those law books weigh a lot more than you think when you're trying to carry a lot of them at a time. So
precedent is heavy.
Indeed, it is. But the nice thing was, everybody talks about job creation. We literally created jobs. We built the building, hired local contractors, and put a lot of good folks to work. And so we're doing our part.
And got a really nice product out of it.
Yeah, really did.
And not that you're there that much, because you spend a hell of a lot of time in the legislature.
You know what? Every day, even when the legislature is in session, which we will be again in a couple months if I get reelected, but I go into the law office every morning and work for a couple hours, and I go off to the Capitol, and usually I go back to the law office again, as those clients are kind of important to me too, and I want to make sure I do right by them.
So there was a problem a couple of years ago with ticket scalpers who were buying up all the tickets to concerts.
Yeah.
And some legislator came forward with legislation to stop that.
Well, it's that sort of thing that drives you nuts.
And that was you again, once again.
It was, well, yeah. What
they call the Hannah Montana bill.
Yeah, and when people, when some folks try to take advantage of everybody else, which is what they were doing there. They were literally jumping electronically. They were using this electronic, it's called bots software. You go online to buy a ticket. They would jump to the head of the line using this software, buy up all of the good tickets, and then go on the secondary sites and resell them. Some, not just for twice or 3 times face value, but for 10 or 20 or 30 times face value. Just ripping people off. And so we made a little change in the law that just says you can't use this software, so that everybody has an opportunity to buy a ticket. You shouldn't.
I mean, that just typifies, though, to me, what you do in terms of looking out for people. Nuclear trash. You were worried about the feds.
No, well, they keep ripping us off. They're taking our every time you pay your electric bill. There's a little tiny fee that goes off to the federal government so that they can open up a facility to take the nuclear trash, the nuclear waste.
But they don't do it.
They haven't done it.
They take the money, but they don't take the trash.
$30 billion now. $30 billion they now have of our money that they're doing nothing with. In fact, they just took Yucca Mountain offline. That's where it was going to go. It's now not going to go there anymore. So they don't stop taking the fee. And so the average Minnesotan, I think at the last count, it was like $171 per Minnesotan had gone into this fund. Now multiply that by everybody in Minnesota plus everybody in the country. The feds just keep taking the money and don't produce anything as a result of it.
And the nuclear waste still sits there.
And it sits there, and it sits in the most dangerous place that it possibly could, right along the river. And it's just tragic. And to sit here and say, well, and a lot of the utilities were saying, well, Atkins, just be quiet. We don't want it, we don't want to unsettle things here. Everything's going fine. And everything is not going fine. When we have that amount of nuclear waste, in fact, some of the containers now are beyond the warranty period. They were warranted for 20 years. We're beyond that period for storage. We've got to do something, and we've got to do something soon, and the feds are doing nothing except taking our money.
That's why we've got to get you back in the legislature to be a voice.
Well, you're getting me a little passionate about these are things that are just basic.
You took on Google a couple of years ago.
Well, if Google messes up, you take on Google.
And they were blocking phone calls. You put an end to that.
Well, we worked it out.
That's putting an end to it.
Yeah. Well, Google's responsible. They did the right thing, and so have a number of others that. When pointed out where the flaw was, they've stepped up and done the right thing.
Now, bringing us more up to date, and you just touched on health care, we'll talk about it more. Our Republican legislators, particularly in this area, and you are our neighbor, are walking around talking about how they brought down the deficit, how they brought the $5 billion deficit down to $1.2 billion. My response is, you can't steal from the schools and claim that you're bringing down the deficit, because what you're doing is placing the schools in a situation where they have to go out and borrow money, taxes go up, levies are instituted. Talk to the situation, the deficit situation here.
It's simple. They just borrowed their way out of it. They put $2.7 billion of the deficit on a credit card. And I don't care whether you wanted additional taxes or whether you wanted additional cuts. But in Minnesota, we've got, our Constitution requires a balanced budget. And for 150 some odd years of our state's existence, we always did that by either, if we needed more revenues, we brought in additional fees or taxes. Or if we needed to cut expenses, we reduced spending. We didn't borrow our way out of it. Not to this tune. $2.7 billion was borrowed from our kids.
And we haven't borrowed our way out of it because we have to pay that money back. It has to go back to the schools. The schools have to pay interest on the loans that they take. It becomes a lose-lose situation all around. So many
school districts are now exactly in that position where they're having to do short-term borrowing just to meet basic cash flow, basic monthly costs, because we're paying them late at the state by doing this borrowing scenario that we did. Now, in fairness, it wasn't just the Republicans in charge of the House and Senate who voted for that. Governor Dayton agreed to it. And to this day, I'm disappointed in the governor for doing that. I would say it if he was sitting here with us. And he knows how I feel about it.
Well, you wait a couple of weeks, he will be here.
Yeah, well, good. Maybe I'll come back and sit next to him. And I know, he feels like there was no place else to go. We were shut down for 3 weeks. It was a disaster that was continuing to go on.
The longest shutdown in our
made
history.
It very clear that they were not going to be open to anything else. And as Doug Wardlow, who is the representative for this area, said, the time for compromise is over. He gave a very passionate speech about the time for compromise is over. And for those of us who...
But he never began the time to compromise.
Well, he's I guess the nice way to say it would be he's a very principled person. He's probably the single most conservative member of the Minnesota House. Nobody is more off to the right side than Representative Wardlow. And I don't say
Is this the same Representative Wardlow who made a pitch to his own caucus, and when they wouldn't entertain it, ran into the men's room, locked himself in for an hour crying so that they had to call his father at home to come down and get him out? Is that the same Wardlow?
No, I wasn't in the bathroom with him, Alan. I know he was in the bathroom, and there were reports about what upset him and that kind of thing. But he had a very strong feeling about certainly he wanted another constitutional amendment to be put on the ballot relative to right to work issues and things like that, and it didn't quite go the way that he had hoped it was going to go. But that, to me, was also one of the most tragic things about this session. Is the only thing that came out of this legislative session on a large scale were 2 constitutional amendments.
Neither of which, in my estimation, should be part of the Constitution.
Yeah, I see you're taking a position on the, and at this point now, it's for people to decide.
Minnesota Nice says vote no twice.
I understand. Yeah, there's folks who feel very strongly about this. It's now beyond the legislature, and voters are smart in Minnesota, and we'll see what they do on Election Day. But what is so sad to me is that the only thing we had to show for this past session, and I passed some some consumer protection things and that kind of stuff, streamlined some regulations and that sort of thing. But on a large scale, we had all to show for it was 2 constitutional amendments being proposed and $2.5 billion of borrowing to balance the state's budget. That's tragic.
Which is why they call this a do-nothing legislature. And of course, it's the first time in 40 years that the legislature has been controlled in both houses by the Republicans.
Yeah.
So there might be a message there for voters who are watching this and who will be watching this over this next week until Election Day on November 6th.
It's going to be an interesting election. I think it's very much a referendum, though, on the sorts of approaches that you want to have. I think among Democrats, and it wasn't always this way, but among Democrats, there really is a desire to work together, to reach across the aisle. I talked about earlier, I've actually passed more bipartisan legislation than any other legislator over the last 5 years. And then on the counter to that is Representative Wardlow, who I consider a friend, I might add. Just because we disagree doesn't mean we can't get along.
Obviously, you're not too discriminating about your friends.
He summed it up, though, as the time for compromise is over. And if we continue along that path, then I think we continue to see shutdowns and we continue to see this sort of real bashing rather than the opportunity to try to work out solutions that make sense for both sides.
And the fact of the matter is, and the governor has proposed it also, that we have to restructure our tax situation, much the same as being argued on a national level, so that the people at the top, and if you're earning more than $250,000 a year, under that you would pay the same as everybody else. Over that there would be a small increase, but it would go a long way with those few 2,000 people who are in that situation to bringing down our deficit and getting us on a level playing field. Those are the things where we have legislators who are...
It's interesting you say that, because I just found out if Minnesota simply had a flat tax, which was proposed, I think, first by Steve Forbes, who was a Republican presidential candidate some odd years ago, 30 years ago, a flat tax would actually mean that the folks on the bottom would pay less and the folks at the top would pay a little bit more. Right now in Minnesota, we are so upside down. The folks at the top end of the income scale pay about 5%, 5.6, 5.7% of their income as taxes, where the folks on the low end pay anywhere from 12 to 17% of their income as taxes. So simply a flat tax at about 10% would be more fair. And it's a Republican idea, but you don't hear that come up too often.
No, because that's called raising taxes, and there are certain people, I think Wardlow is one of them, who took the pledge. No new taxes.
I was always curious, though, why Republicans here in Minnesota did not talk about supporting a flat tax, because all across the country, Republicans would all the time, it was just a mantra, flat tax, flat tax, flat tax. But it never came up here in Minnesota. And then we had the math done, and we realized the reason they don't want the flat tax is because folks at the top end would pay a little bit more. And when I say top end, I'm talking people that are making $250,000, $500,000, $750,000 a year. And the ones making over $1 million a year are the ones who are actually at the 5.5% rate. They're at the very lowest rate when you put all the taxes together. They pay far lower than anybody else in Minnesota.
And talk about inequity. That is just a glaring example of inequity. It's a shameful situation. And until we get people to vote for legislators who are interested in restructuring things like the tax situation, we're going to be in this deficit. We're going to be struggling. Statistically, Minnesota is not where it was 4 years ago in terms of the nation. Our education standards have slipped. We can't afford that. We're a small state. We have to be on the cutting edge of all these things.
Actually, certainly with respect to education, the one thing that sets us apart, it gets talked about almost so often that people start to not even think about it anymore. But the one thing that really sets Minnesota apart is our educational strength, our educated workforce. And when we stop having that, then the old line, then we become just a cold Omaha. We don't have that sets us apart, that brings in those corporate 500 companies that want to be here and work here and have employees here.
Well, Sharon and I moved here 15 years ago. It's pushing 16. And one of the reasons was that she said Minnesota is really a cutting-edge state. It's really where the smart people are. And she looked at me and she said, "You're not too swift, so let's go someplace where the smart people are." And so we moved here. And now I find the state is not as smart as we thought it was.
Yeah, but there's a lot of hope here, though. I mean, I think as long as we can continue to see education as an investment and not merely as a cost, that is the key difference. And unfortunately, there's lots more folks, it seems more all the time, that want to talk about education merely as a cost. And when we start to forget about that, when we stop investing in early childhood in particular, and K-12, that's when we are in danger of becoming cold Omaha.
And pre-K education is so important. And you touched on, and we only have a few minutes left to my shock, but you touched on health care. Now, what can we do to take us out of this morass of health care? And you just had to go to a commissioner with a Republican legislator to get a woman what she needs to save her life, which the insurance company, which shouldn't even be in the healthcare business, turned down. What can we do?
Well, I'll tell you, the single biggest issue before us right now is insurance exchanges. the ability to purchase online health insurance for your small business, as an entrepreneur, as an individual. It's akin to going on Travelocity or Kayak to buy an airplane fare or an airfare, is the ability to buy your health insurance online. The reason why that is at the front and center of the debate over health care is because right now, under whether you like the Affordable Care Act that the feds passed or not, doesn't matter. The fact is if we don't adopt insurance exchanges here in Minnesota, then the feds will do it for us. And I'm one that I generally believe the best government is the most local. I think your mayor and city council, your school board members, state representatives you run into at the gas station and the grocery store, you're always going to get better responsiveness from those folks than you will from somebody off in Washington, D.C. These insurance exchanges, which are part of the Affordable Care Act, will allow, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a small business person like I am, the hardest, one of the most difficult things we have is being able to get competitive bids on our health insurance. If we could hire more people. We could make more money, we could drive Minnesota's economy, but we can't because we're one small business trying to get a competitive bid. By doing insurance exchanges, which Minnesota has an ability to do right now, and we should take that and move forward with it. Republicans, by the way, have been standing in the way of this for now. Hopefully they'll get on board. The more moderate Republican members have signed on to this legislation that will allow for competitive online bidding over your business as an individual or a small business or an entrepreneur, so that you can get competitive health insurance that's affordable, that makes sense for your business and for you individually.
A single payer would alleviate the whole health care
crisis. I know you're a single payer guy. It's the reality of it is we're not going to be able to get to that point.
And get insurance companies out of the insurance
but
business.
If we can at least get them to do real competition, rather than only have a couple of business, 3-4 health insurers here in Minnesota, that's not a lot of competition. And I guarantee, as a small business person with just 9 employees, we can't get competitive bids. We can't get coverage that fits our business. If we get to that point and save some money, we'd hire more people, we'd make more money, drive the economy. That's what is necessary when it comes to health insurance.
One last thing, and we're down to the last minute and a half. Should the people of Minnesota have to pay the tab for legal costs for a member of a staffer of the Senate who had an affair with his boss?
I don't think so.
We were talking about $100,000 minimum and perhaps more.
Well, I think it's well beyond
that
at this point. And they hired good lawyers to defend them.
It seems to me outrageous that we have to pay for this indiscretion.
Well, I'll tell you, if I was in charge of the Senate, which I'm not, and I don't really want to be a senator, wearing the wigs and the robes and being all fancy like that. I'm a House member. But I'd be out raising money for a legal defense fund rather than asking Minnesota's taxpayers to pay that. That's, in my opinion, my personal opinion, I think that's absolutely wrong to be looking to Minnesota's taxpayers to pay a legal fee for that sort of indiscretion and claim being made.
Another reason why Joe Atkins is a people's legislator and not an ivory tower legislator.
Because I'm just a simple kid from Inver Grove is all.
And always a pleasure to have you. I wish you really good luck in this election.
Thank you.
And keep fighting for the little guy, because there aren't enough people doing it.
Will do. Thanks, Al.
Thanks, Joe.